we're continuing coverage on the anomalous government flood control programs. Our next guest cites three mutually reinforcing forces that allow public corruption to persist in the Philippines. With us now for more is Benito Teehankee, Professor of Management and Organization at Salle University, Manila. Good to see you, Ben. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Kathy. Thanks for the opportunity.
So what have you found, Ben, using the institutional sociology on why public corruption appears to be so persistent in the Philippines?
Terrific question, Kathy. We can think of corruption as a house, and we ask ourselves why this house keeps standing, right? Well, it's standing on three major pillars. The first pillar, of course, are the rules and the enforcement of those rules. This is very important to make sure that people behave honestly and honor their duties, especially as public servants. The second pillar holding up the house of corruption is the beliefs and values of the officials themselves. This is the sense of duty. Our Constitution says that public service is a public trust, but it's an open question whether anyone believes that. And the third pillar, of course, are the attitudes and beliefs of the citizens themselves. If they see corruption as business as usual, or as we say, ganyan talaga, and look the other way, then the house of corruption remains standing.
Did you just say House of Corruption? It sounds like a Netflix movie or upcoming one.
To appear in your screen.
Yeah, one of the solutions you provided actually includes electing and appointing, and I wanted to get to that after discussing what one might contest that if none is done to dismantle the dynasties, and I've spoken with Professor Teehankee about this, then we'd all end up voting for the same personalities, Ben. So how do we get started today?
Well, the dynastic problem has been a long-running issue. I believe there's very little incentive among our legislators to actually pass a law, so that provision in the Constitution may not see reality soon. But the core principle is that of delicadeza, meaning whether when you're in an official position, whether you should do things that benefit you or avoid doing that. If we look at the issues facing us now in the flood control matter, not all of it is dynastic, honestly. Some of these are simply just allegations of behaviors of people who are just incentivized by the very high rewards for corruption and the very low probability of punishment. So it still goes back to whether we have the right rules and whether we enforce the rules until somebody gets jailed and actually punished. But in the long run, I believe curtailing familial relations among politicians would be a good thing, but it will not be enough.
And a tolerant citizenry wouldn't be good in that mix. As you mentioned, the reinforcing forces, how do we get them to act then, especially the younger generation, the Gen Zs and the millennials?
Well, we need to educate all citizens that we are in a Republican democracy, which means that, as the Constitution says, all government authority emanates from the people, right? But a lot of citizens really don't take this right very seriously. They think we're still in a feudal system where those in power are looked up to and the rest of us have to tolerate what they do. In fact, if you talk to citizens, they will always say, ganyan talaga, ano magagawa natin? So, but we're seeing some level of outrage, and rightly so. The question, of course, is will this outrage be sustained and converted into action? Because outrage per se never corrected institutional problems because they're short-lived and they don't really change behaviors in the long run. So the citizens have to really form themselves into a movement that is sustainable. Really monitor. For example, we see a lot of people being alleged and named in the congressional investigations. But the question always when I look at these investigations is how many will actually be convicted and actually be punished. So it's up to the citizens to monitor this until the right people are punished.
Does it always have to be taking it to the streets? What sort of an expression are we looking at, especially as we've already been empowered online?
Well, I believe a public protest is an important part of it because that's very visible. And as you know, when people see others speaking up and speaking out, it encourages others as well. But what I'm saying is that the public show of outrage is not sufficient. This has to be converted to actual vigilance in monitoring cases until they are delivered up to conviction, and all the way to elections when we choose only people who have a track record of fighting corruption. Because in the end, no matter how much we go to the streets, if the public keeps electing people without a clear track record against corruption, that pillar of the House will just remain standing.
Just as a final point, Ben, and I wanted to pick up on educating and empowering. Tell us then what types of corruption and harms are not so out there, evident and easily recognizable, but is very pervasive. How then should we keep from getting drawn in?
Well, the basic types of corruptions are really bribes, especially regulatory bribes for permits and so on. But what we're seeing also is the infrastructure type, when we see that despite the growth of our economy, services to the public and infrastructure is not improving, then common sense should tell the public that they should demand more. They just take it for granted that bridges collapse, that roads are bad, that floods will enter their homes. And this is actually nonsense because we know that the government allocates resources for these. How come it's not improving? Simple mathematics should tell you that if there is an input, there should be an output, right? So if things are not improving, citizens should ask. They should file freedom of information inquiries. They should write their congressmen, they should write their mayors. May we know why this is not improving? So this is important that citizens do on a regular basis and not just during elections or not just during scandals as we are seeing now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your insights, Ben. I much appreciate. Ben Teehankee of De La Salle
My pleasure.
University, Manila.